Oh, there's John. John, we're going to make you a host. So you can mute and unmute yourself and screen share if you want to.
Done.
All right, I just unmuted.
There you are.
Great.
How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Good.
Yeah, let me do I need to do the admitting or
No, you don't need to do anything.
okay.
All you need to do is you can unmute yourself if you get
I
background noise. Otherwise,
okay, I did I've unmuted myself.
yeah. Nikki's here. She said the two of you have coordinated.
Yeah, we had a good conversation on Friday afternoon.
That's
Spirited conversation.
good. So people are coming in. Welcome to those of you who are already in the room. We have about 200 plus people registered.
That's
75
incredible.
people are here. We'll wait a couple of minutes to 1 o'clock and then we will get started.
Great.
And it's 1:04. Do you want to get started?
Yes, let's get
Oh,
started. Okay. Can take the agenda down. Yes. Okay, I don't see any faces. I don't even see my own face. Let's see. There I am. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. If you're not too shy, it would be great if you turn on your cameras. It's kind of weird talking to a blank black box, and I know not everybody wants to be seen, but it would be nice if we could make the effort and at least see everybody since we're not in a real room. So this is the October 2nd, 2023 retiree chapter meeting. My name is Ann Friedman. I'm the chapter chair, and along with my two officers, our two officers, Diane Mena, our vice president, and Bonnie Nelson, the secretary, we work together to lead the chapter along with our executive committee. So I hope that you've been staying healthy and relaxed as we enjoy a respite from the MA struggle, thanks to the court order of Judge Lyle Frank. So get out there, and if you need to, use those Medicare cards and those senior care and take care of yourself. Finally, please make sure you've paid your dues, either via snail mail or online. We want to increase our membership, and it looks like we're doing well. So the topic of today is lessons from the 2022 elections, relevance for 2024. The 2022 elections for the U.S. House of Representatives in New York State last November saw a major shift as 4 Democrats were replaced by Republicans, which was crucial to the Republicans taking control of the House. Why did this happen? And what did the events of 2022 suggest for political action in the 2024 elections? You may recall we were going to have this program last January 9th, but it was preempted by a city council hearing on the Medicare Advantage, at which many of you testified and were outside demonstrating. So we're doing that program today. We have 2 speakers, Nikki Richardson and John Tarleton, and following them, a few brief comments from Liz Stevenson, who is our vote coordinator. Debbie Bell will give a brief update on the MA stuff. There's really not much new. And then we'll have a few announcements at the end, most importantly, about the contract campaign. So I'm going to introduce both speakers, and then they've coordinated, and they'll spend about 40 minutes presenting to us. We'll give Liz about 5 minutes or so, and then open for Q&A. And I apologize for my voice. I don't know what happened to it. So Nikki joined NYSET in early 2015 after spending 8 years in the private sector representing hotel, restaurant, and gaming workers. She's an accomplished organizer and has several years of experience in advocacy, negotiations, coalition building, and community engagement. While she has held many roles at NYSET, she currently serves as NYSET's political director. And in her free time, she spends time with her wife, Patricia, and her 2 children. John Tarleton is the editor-in-chief of The Independent, a free progressive newspaper and website. He hosts the Independent News Hour, a weekly news and public affairs show that airs Tuesdays from 5 to 6 on WBAI 99.5 FM. From 2009 to 2014, John served as associate editor at Clarion, the PSC newsletter, where he won numerous local and national labor journalism awards. John is a perennial skeptic of the Democratic Party, who also believes it's vitally important for those on the left to engage with it. So I'm very proud to have these 2 great speakers today. So let's get started. And I don't know what order they chose, but
We're gonna just pin Paul.
Okay, well, that sounds very interesting and engaging. So go for it.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm Nikki Richardson. I'm the political director for NYSET, which, as most of you know, is the statewide union in which the PSC is a member of. So NYSET is the statewide organization. We also have 2 national affiliates, the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association. I am thrilled to be here to talk about what went wrong in 2022, and more specifically, how we're going to make sure it doesn't go wrong again in 2024. John and I have had a little bit of time to chat. I think he is just as thrilled about having this dialogue as I am.
Definitely.
We have very similar opinions on some of the stuff that went wrong, but I look forward to a spirited and engaging conversation.
Definitely. We did have a chance to talk on Friday, Nikki. One thing we didn't decide was who would go first with their analysis.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I think some of you know me. I'm John Tarleton. currently editor of The Independent. It's a free progressive newspaper and website, as Ann was saying. It's been publishing here in New York since 2000. I've been involved with it pretty much since its beginning. And but also, I spent 5 years at PSC and Clarion, and it's so nice to be back among friends. It was a great honor to serve as Clarion's associate editor from 2009 to 2014. I met so many amazing PSC members in that era, and many of you are on this call today. And when I worked at PSC, my editor, Peter Hogness, gave me the leeway to explore and write about the scholarship and the working life of PSC members, which was a really great experience. But to me, the most fascinating thing about being embedded in the PSC was the chance to observe and learn from the union's leaders and its hundreds of activist cadre who managed to combine a deeply held leftist ideals with a strong sense of realism and a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the union's members, who counted on the union to safeguard their best interests. And I'm saying this all as a preface to the remarks I'm going to give here. When you're on the left, of course, it's easy to talk a good game, offer sweeping critiques of what's wrong, while arguing for ideal blueprints for how everything should change. But taking charge of a large institution, as the New Caucus did in 2000 at the PSC, and tacking into the headwinds of the neoliberal era to win for CUNY everything it deserves, for PSC has been an epic undertaking, still ongoing. And I learned so much from being on hand to cover that process over a 5-year period. And I see something parallel that has happened since 2016. Here in the United States, we've seen an electoral left emerge, really beginning with the first of Bernie Sanders' 2 presidential campaigns. And it's emerged in a strong way here in New York. We have 8 socialists in the state legislature. We have people like AOC and Jamal Bowman in Congress. These kind of candidates we were not seeing here in New York before 2016. So this is an exciting development, which I want to talk a little bit more about later. And I think it does relate to the topic of why the Democrats crashed and burned so badly here in New York in 2022. So I wrote a cover article for the Independent in November of last year, a week or two after the election. And I can put the link here in the chat. See if I get, how do we make, is there a way to put that into the chat? Well, anyway.
John, I'll put it in the chat for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the reason I wrote that, so that article is called New York's Midterm Debacle, like a cascading series of blunders by leading New York Democrats handed half of Congress to the Republicans. Can the state party's dysfunction be reversed? And in that article, I traced out a lot of different threads for how this debacle happened. In one passage I wrote, there was no one cause, no one culprit for the New York Dems faceplant. Instead, the causes of their failure flowed into each other as tributaries, forming a mighty stream of hubris, incompetence, and cronyism that would lay waste to their own electoral aspirations and that of Democrats across the country. And I wrote this piece because I wanted to counter what I saw emerging as in the corporate mainstream media, a very sort of lazy and dishonest and overly simplistic narrative about how the Democrats lost in New York because they had indulged the party's left wing, especially on defund the police and fighting crime, because that's what the Democratic leadership always does when they mess up, is try to blame the progressive wing of the party. And as I said in that passage, in reality, there were many disparate causes for that debacle last year, but I think they can all be traced back to the party establishment. the people who actually wield control over the party's fundraising and messaging and have a lock on most of the most prominent elected offices in this state. And a couple of things I think that are important to keep in mind as we discuss this today with the Democrats here in New York, and it's often the case in other parts of the country. I don't think these people are that bright or strategic or as appealing as they like to think. And they're certainly not as indispensable as they think. Most of them have risen to their positions either by catering to the donor class, in some cases by their own personal wealth, or simply being loyal apparatchiks who did the bidding of the people above them in their political hierarchy, and then waited for their turn to be tapped to go to a higher position. So that doesn't take a lot of brilliance to sort of play that role. And then I think for a second thing is Democrats in New York in particular, for them, the left is their real enemy and not the right. I mean, just look how hard they have fought back against the progressive wing in the party in recent years when it finally began to win some elections. You compare that to the lackluster efforts they showed last year in the midterms, but we saw this even years before when Andrew Cuomo was governor. He did everything he could to keep Republicans in control of the state Senate long after demographics would have suggested they shouldn't be able to hold that in a blue state like New York. And we've seen figures like Eric Adams, Hakeem Jeffries, and of course, the state party chair, Jay Jacobs, spend far more time attacking the left than really leading a serious fight back against the right wing. And with Jay Jacobs in the state Democratic Party, they literally provided no messaging, no support, nothing for these candidates in these swing districts last year. He seemed to be most concerned about stopping India Walton from winning the mayoral election in Buffalo. She ran as a socialist and was a Democratic Party nominee in their primary. And he spent a lot of time trying to prop up the mayor of Buffalo, who was running as a write-in candidate in the general election, and seemed to completely forget about what was happening in these congressional districts. And I think, unfortunately, one other thing to keep in mind with high-ranking Democratic Party leaders, in some ways, they're kind of like Wall Street banks. They're too big to fail. And in their case, it's their reputations that must be bailed out by blaming everyone but themselves for their failures. And again, I think that leads to the kind of left punching we often see that gets voiced in the corporate media outlets. And it follows a very familiar narrative that, the party should have been more conservative, should have hewed to the middle. And in the piece, what I trace out is actually, again, there were many different threads to this failure. For starters, the state legislature let a conservative majority take control of the state's highest court, the New York Court of Appeals, which then undermined the ability of the Democrats to do redistricting in a way that would have maximized their results last year. Instead, essentially, a Republican judge in Bath County, New York, ended up in control of the process, and we got these maps that were perfectly set up for a Republican wave in the Hudson Valley and Long Island. I know Nikki witnessed that up close and personal as the legislature kind of bumbled their way through that one. And then, so redistricting was definitely a disaster, but the Democrats were the author of that disaster through their own negligence. And then also just some of the selfishness is astounding. I think someone who really stands out as a villain from all of this was Sean Patrick Maloney. He was the chair. He was I believe, a 6-term incumbent up in the Hudson Valley, a very wealthy individual himself with lots of connections on Wall Street. And he was tapped by Nancy Pelosi in Washington to lead the Democratic National Campaign Committee that was going to be working to defeat Democratic incumbents around the country. And when the whole redistricting mess unfolded here in New York, and the districts got redrawn, when those maps finally came out in late May of 2022, Maloney changed districts. He abandoned his own district to take an adjacent district that had his own district had voted for Biden by 8 points. He went to an adjacent district that voted for Biden by 10 points. So for a 2-point advantage, he abandoned his own district and moved into a district that already had a Democratic incumbent who was doing a great job. His name was Mondaire Jones. And because Maloney had all the big money behind him, Mondaire decided not to fight it out and tried to run for a new district here in New York City. And then so Maloney pulls that power play, and then ultimately he ends up losing the race to a novice Republican who had spent 1 term in the state assembly named Mike Lawler. And in the process of losing that, he won a primary against Alessandra Biaggi by outspending her 10-1. She was an excellent progressive state senator who came into office in 2018. He outspent her, won the primary, and then he basically went MIA. Slate, Alex Salmon, an excellent reporter, had the whole autopsy on that race. Maloney basically refused to engage with all sorts of grassroots groups in his new district, just as, I guess, assumed he was going to coast to victory, and then went on a 2-week vacation to Europe in the middle of October, weeks before the midterms, with Adam Schiff, taking a junket around Europe. And then he comes back and realizes he's in trouble, and he ends up sucking money out of 2 close races in Arizona and California that the Democrats would ultimately lose by less than a point each to try to revive his campaign. He lost. So, we not only saw the Democrats' flailings cost the 4 seats here in New York, Maloney, through just incredible hubris, also, you could argue, cost seats on the other side of the country. And then at the end of this, he got sent off to represent the United States at the OECD in Paris. So nothing succeeds like failure with at least some of these people. So I think, and I don't want to just, again, spend all my time directing criticism at these people, but I think we just have to understand this is what we're dealing with here. That of course it's important that the Democrats hold power and not the Republicans, but they're not all equal, and we shouldn't. Again, I think these people are far from indispensable, and they're certainly not as great as they think they are, or the press clippings they may have received. And I think it's also, looking back on that and thinking about how we would go forward, I think it's important for a moment just to think about what the Democratic Party is. This was something I explored in that piece as well. It's the world's oldest continuing political party, dating back to 1832. It was founded by a New Yorker named Martin Van Buren. He was a important political personage in the 1820s and 30s here in New York, and was an ally of Andrew Jackson in that era. And the Democratic Party, has kind of taken on many iterations over the years. In its earliest days, it was the party of the Southern slaveocracy and Northern political machines, and it would later become a party of the Jim Crow South and these same Northern political machines. And then it would evolve into something much better in the FDR New Deal era, though it was still tied to the Dixiecrats of the South. And and then in recent decades, it's become more a party of sort of social liberalism and corporate friendly economic policies that have in part turned their back on sort of that New Deal legacy that I think a lot of us cherish and have a lot of respect for. And the way they're set up is, it's a party fraught with contradictions. It has obviously close alliances with the capitalist class. It's it manages at the same time to be both the party of the tenants and the landlords, of the teachers unions and the charter school industry, of the peace activists and the military industrial complex. And you can go on down the line with that. So that, to me, that's what we're dealing with. It's, again, a lot of contradictions there, but we can't walk away from it. I know there's a temptation on the left sometimes to want to throw our hands up in the air or wander off into the wilderness of third party politics, but the Democratic Party is a site of struggle, is the way I see it, and we have to engage with it and try to be as smart as we can about that. And again, I think that's where some of the experience of the PSC is so valuable, with the way its transformation over the last 20 plus years, when the new caucus came into power, and with a really bold agenda, and then its left-wing leadership had to figure out how to navigate in the halls of power and actually be effective. And again, the left is having to confront that right now. Specifics, I guess, ideas I want to throw out there about how we move forward is, unions, of course, have to represent the interests of their membership, but sometimes I think that can be approached in a parochial manner, and especially with relationships to elected officials. There's sometimes what I call sort of a most favored nation approach to this, where the efforts are around, each particular union is looking to build sort of preferential relationships with individual electeds in the hopes of being able to achieve transactional goals. And that's totally understandable, especially for public sector unions in the post-Janus era, where maintaining membership is now more challenging than it was before. But I think sometimes unions underestimate their potential political power if they look for opportunities to combine their forces. We saw a glimpse of that in January, where unions played a key role in stopping Kathy Hochul's nomination of Hector LaSalle to New York's High Court. He turned out to be a very conservative and polarizing jurist who had a history of anti-labor rulings, of anti-choice rulings, and a sort of a shocking deference to police and prosecutorial power. And some very powerful unions in this state just said, this guy is too far from what we should expect for New York's High Court. And you saw a really remarkable coalition, and I think labor played a key role in that, to get some pretty conventional Democrats to buck the governor for the first time ever on a High Court nomination. So if, again, I know unions sometimes have to kind of take a little bit of a more narrow approach, but if we can at least be cognizant of how potentially powerful unions are when they unite their forces, I think that could be very helpful. And I think another thing to just keep in mind is, as I was alluding to earlier, there's been such an upsurge of a younger generation of activists that really, in the electoral arena, we first saw in 2016. In many cases, these are the people who occupied the public squares during Occupy, who marched for Black Lives Matter, who are now organizing unions at a furious pace in all kinds of workplaces like Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's, in graduate schools, in universities across the country. And in the millennials, in Generation Z, we have what all pollsters tell us is the most progressive left-wing generations in the history of the United States. And again, if unions can kind of look a little bit over the horizon and a little bit past just their immediate relationships to specific politicians, be thinking about how do we how do we support this? I mean, and among the the younger generation of left-wing electeds and their supporters, they're passionate about unions. They they think there's a level of support that's never been really seen in the United States for decades for unions across the public, but especially in the younger generation. And I think sometimes from what I've seen here in New York, unions sort of just reflexively support the same old politicians because it's just the the sort of comfortable reflex maybe. And to me, a particular sad example of this tendency we saw last year here in New York in a state senate race in a new district that stretched along the East River from Astoria down to Williamsburg and over to a corner of the east side of Manhattan. We had a young socialist, Kristen Gonzalez, versus Liz Crowley, who once served on the city council and has kind of been on the scene for a while, and is the cousin of Joe Crowley, the guy who lost to AOC in 2018. And the unions came down overwhelmingly on the side of Liz Crowley. And the district was drawn in a way that Kristen was almost certain to win because most of the district had repeatedly voted for other socialists like AOC and Tiffany Kamban and Zoran Mamdani and whoever else. And Kristen won by like 27 points. But the unions threw all these resources into Liz Crowley. It's just, I just remember thinking at the time, why can't people just kind of let go of some of these reflexes a little bit and embrace this positive new direction that is emerging all around them. And so let's, instead of unwittingly sort of smothering the future in its crib, let's try to support it whenever it's reasonably possible to do so. And as far as 2024, these actual upcoming elections, I mean, obviously we need the Democrats to hold the White House. I certainly wish a credible challenger in the primaries had emerged to President Biden. He's way too feeble at this point. But I don't think it's going to happen. If it had, it would have happened by now. So we're going to have to, sort of grit our teeth on that one. And, I think, here in New York, we have the problem that Kathy Hochul never replaced Jay Jacobs as the chair of the Democratic Party, despite all sorts of urging to do so. So we need to get those congressional seats back. It's not going to be easy. I know Nikki's probably more directly involved in those efforts. Obviously, someone else who played a really destructive role last year was Mayor Eric Adams. By his nonstop fear mongering validated all these Republican talking points that were picked up on by Lee Zeldin and these suburban Republican candidates who prevailed. And he's basically doing it all over again with his scapegoating of the migrant people who are arriving in the city. They're not going to destroy the city. They're putting some stress and strain on our services. But New York has assimilated immigrants for centuries now, and at larger rates than what we're seeing in our present time. So it's a big challenge, but it's not this apocalyptic moment. The new mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, is taking a 180-degree different direction with his rhetoric, embracing the challenge. I think what we're all seeing is Adams isn't really serious about governing. He mostly wants to party and hang out with his celebrity friends, and then just sort of fearmonger and sort of repeat right-wing talking points. So this is going to be potentially very dangerous in 2024 if the mayor of New York, is validating constantly these talking points, and these suburban districts are very susceptible to what the media that comes out of New York, both the New York Post.
John, I hate to interrupt you.
If I'm out of time,
Can you wrap up so Nikki has?
No, I'm actually going to echo a lot of what John has said.
Okay, I just, we have about 40 minutes for this part, and we
I'm
won't
happy
have
to
time
step aside for Nikki.
for Q&A. We won't have
Got it.
time for Q&A.
I'll be fast. I think that John and I agree on many of the reasons why things went wrong. We have some disagreeing opinions, I think, about some of the institutional structural issues. One of the things that I think we would be remiss if we did not mention is the real lackluster effort by Kathy Hochul and her team. And I want to be really clear on this. This is a difficult thing for me to talk about because Kathy Hochul so far, while she has been very divisive in some ways, has been a pretty staunch supporter of public education. She delivered record public ed increases to our K through 12 members this year. So it's challenging to talk about her and her campaign in a disparative way, but there is no reason why a Democrat in New York State should not have won by an incredibly comfortable margin running for governor. And I think that Hochul's, whether it was like a lack of seriousness or a lack of real concern over the threat, was very, very misinformed. Her campaign was tanking towards the end. I think people will remember seeing the headlines. There was a point where she was only beating Zeldin by a mere 4 or 5 points, and it was crisis zone, where, I mean, labor unions and everyone was pulling out of other races, diverting resources from races in the Hudson Valley on Long Island to go and support the governor, to make sure that we held on to the governorship. And then I also think that what was minimized was the Zeldin impact, specifically on Long Island, which was his home base. I think that folks expected Zeldin to perform well, but I don't think that there was this concern the same way that it ended up unfolding, that there would be a clean sweep of Long Island for Republicans. So for those of you that are tracking what is happening nationally, we're still in the same situation where we are have lost the House by a small margin. I say this, and sometimes folks think I'm being dramatic, but quite literally, the fate of the nation rests in New York's hands. I can't overstate it enough. We have 5 competitive races that will be happening across the state. And I agree with John that one of the big problems here is that we don't have a unified strategy as a labor movement. There are many of us that are actively trying to build coalitions with other political staff across the state to try to make sure that we have a unified approach to how we're handling these elections. I would say where we expect to be the most unified is in Congressional District 22, which is out in central New York. NYSET actually has a member that is running for Congress. He was a former state senator who won his state Senate seat by 10 votes. And prior to that, he was a local president in the NYSET governance structure and an AP biology teacher. So it's a real opportunity for labor to coalesce around behind a candidate who understands our values and has a proven track record of being successful in these really tight races. So we'll be working very heavily on that race. Also, the Hudson Valley. I think someone mentioned this in the chat, but one of the things that John wrote about in his article that I just wanted to mention as well is the governor, in her infinite wisdom, picked a congressional candidate in a marginal congressional district and appointed him to be the lieutenant governor. So we then had this vacancy in Congress where we lost, right? We lost that Democratic seat to a Republican. So those are going to be 2 areas for potential pickups, both Congressional District 17, which is represented by Mike Lawler, which John talked about earlier, and Congressional District 19. And then, of course, on Long Island, where we have our friend George Santos. I say this obviously not seriously, he's no friend of ours. There's going to be some very competitive races on Long Island in both Congressional District 3 and Congressional District 4. I'm going to wrap up to leave time for questions. So, Andrea, I see you have your hand raised. It's nice to see you, Andrea. Oh, we have to ask you to unmute.
Are we taking questions now, Anne? I guess so. Well, hi.
No, we're not. in 5 minutes. I just want to give Liz Stevenson 5 minutes to talk about Vote Cope because she has to leave. She's the Vote Cope coordinator, and as most of you know or should know, we can't use dues money to do political work. So that's where Vote Cope comes in. And Liz, are you here?
I am. Yeah. Hi, Ann.
Okay, so nice to meet you, Liz. Tell us who you are and give us a quick uplifting
Sure.
pitch.
Can I share my screen? Is that okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So I'm going to do a very short, I'll try to make this as fast as possible, little slideshow. So everything that you just heard from John and Nikki is very relevant to COPE. It sounds like they're talking a lot about the state and the national level. And I just want to put in a little plug for, we do have city elections this November, even before all of that stuff comes up. So the PSC has endorsed a few city council races, and those races will be happening this November. And in particular, Justin Brannan in Southern Brooklyn has a very competitive race against another incumbent because of redistricting. So another Democratic incumbent in the city council decided to switch parties to Republican in order to challenge him in the general election. So that's a very tight race in South Brooklyn, but there's a few others. So let me make this quick. I'm Liz. I'm a HEO at City Tech, and I've been the Vote Cope coordinator for a little less than a year. And I just want to go through a little bit more about what COPE is. So COPE is our PAC, really. It stands for Committee on Political Education. And it is how the PSC and how NYSET raise money to spend on political work. As you may or may not know, union dues, regular dues aren't used in a political way, so on political work. And it is broadly nonpartisan. And again, it's part of NYSET's umbrella COPE. You know, PSC has our own COPE within NYSET's umbrella COPE, and it's a statewide advocacy fund. So we use these funds on campaigns like New Deal for CUNY, New Deal for Higher Ed, to support political candidates. So, you know, when we make these endorsements, we do make donations to candidates. It allows us to give contributions to other organizations who fight alongside us, you know, CUNY Rising Alliance and other groups, and to stipend members to do political work. So your chapter, the Retiree chapter, has some of the best participation union-wide in terms of contributing to COPE. Many of you are probably longtime COPE contributors and maybe even know more about COPE than I do, honestly. So I encourage you to get in touch with me and share your wisdom. But right now, fewer than 2,000 PSC members make payroll contributions, and you know, these numbers really do matter, and this fund really matters in order to affect change. You know, as everybody was just stating, who's in political power has a great deal of import in terms of our work, our campuses, our students, your benefits, your retiree benefits, all of that, your pensions. So these are some older victories. I do want to point out that the PSC did make a number of endorsements in the last cycle for city council. And that means that we have a lot of champions and allies in the city council currently. And that was one of the things that helped shape that fight over Medicare Advantage that affected you all so greatly. So, you know, that continues to be important that we have those allies in the city council because our mayor, as was just stated, has not been super friendly to CUNY and to PSC members. So these are just some recent 2023 budget victories. You know, there's at the state level and at the city level, we have an executive who has proposed cuts or tuition hikes, other things that have not been great ideas for CUNY. And, you know, it's really been up to our legislators, the state legislature and the city council to really push back against all of those cuts. And COPE has been, you know, how we've really achieved that. So, you know, that's why some of the worst things that could have happened didn't happen, you know, in the past year. So here's NYSET's own graphic on, you know, their victories. You can see that NYSET fights alongside us for the New Deal for Higher Ed, for hiring a full-time faculty and staff, you know, all of that, and obviously retirement. So as retirees, you cannot make payroll contributions. Many of you probably know that, but you can do donate online through psccuny.org/cope. There's a link there with a DocuSign document. I'll put it in the chat after I finish presenting. But you can donate a minimum of $25 in a one-time donation. I encourage you to be as generous as possible. If you prefer to make a donation by check, you can also make a check payable to PSC CUNY and mail it to the PSC offices. Again, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and I'll answer any questions people have about any of that. So that's really my brief spiel. But I want to make sure that everybody has time for questions. Did that cover it, Anne?
That was great, Liz. Thank you so much. And we will push Vote Cope whenever we can. So I see people have hands raised, questions for John, questions for Nikki, questions for Liz as long as she can stay. Let's try to keep questions, comments to a minute if we can, so we can get a lot of people involved in the conversation. So I see our first Vice President, Andrea Vasquez, has joined us. I'm going to call on her first, then Erwin Polishuk, and then Lorraine Cohen. Hi, Andrea. Welcome.
Hi, Anne. Thank you. And hi, everybody. You always have such good, robust meetings. And I really appreciated hearing from Nikki and John. Really thoughtful and analysis of what's been going on politically around us. I wanted to add that it is easy to say, of course, it's never enough. We don't get enough. Hochul has been very disappointing in many ways, but it is important. I know you mentioned K-12 got their foundation aid after 20 years. But we have to also see that, you know, we had Cuomo for all those years, and every one of those years was fighting back cuts. And so the minute she came into office, we did get $100 million for 2 years in a row, and certain monies recurring. So that's a difference. It's certainly not enough, and it doesn't make up for all of the problems with capitalism. But but you know, that has been a change for us, and it's something that you know, it's been disappointing since those 2 years, because despite that money, she clearly doesn't have her sights on CUNY. She clearly does not understand CUNY. But I do want to say that we've been working closely with NYSET on, and I think that our union and the higher ed emphasis that we bring to NYSET has really you know, made NYSET think what the right thing, what one way we should approach this is a new deal for higher ed, because we know the reality in Albany is that CUNY and SUNY, you know, upstate people are thinking about SUNY and others are thinking about CUNY, and both systems need an infusion of money. We're not in here against SUNY, and I think that's the value of looking for a state affiliate, is to really help us have a joint fight for improving and funding public higher education all over the state. The upstate community colleges are starving. They're rural kids who have no other opportunities, just like our kids in the city have no opportunities but to go to CUNY. So I don't think we're pitted against them, and I think that that's what we should be, that's the role we should be playing in NYSET. And NYSET has been playing a good role with us and trying to brainstorm about how we have a new head of NYSET. I mean, Melinda Person is there. She's got to rebuild. NYSET fought very, very hard last year against the charter school, you know, money going to charter schools. Did not totally win that, but you know, Melinda has to build up that relationship again with this governor. So you know, it's things we'd like to imagine that it's obvious that we need this money, that we should get this money from Columbia and NYU. But it takes a lot of effort, and I think that statewide, it's important that NYSET is working with us to understand CUNY and make sure that CUNY and our specific needs and the racist austerity that we have suffered, that no one else in New York State has suffered over the past decades, really is brought into the fore and solved. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrea. Appreciate the comments. Erwin Polishuk next. Am I on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My question is for both Nikki and John, and it has to do with the fact that in 2022, it was an off-year election, and we were dealing with a smaller electorate And these races were very close, despite the factors that you point out, which I agree with. I think all of those factors are valid. But in addition, there is the fact that it was an off-year election. And in 2024, we are going to have a presidential election. When these congressional seats come up, the electorate will be much larger. It's very much, it's likely that Trump will be the Republican candidate. And we know that that is going to bring out a huge vote in New York State, because it did in 2020 when Biden won the state by a large margin, but the total electorate in that election was very, very large. So obviously Trump was a polarizing figure who brought out a lot of other voters. So my question is, how does that factor work into the calculations for 2024? Considering all these other issues that you've raised, how does this getting out the vote, electorate size, and so on affect the election?
That's a great question. I'm going to respond first, if you don't mind, John. I think
Please.
that there's a couple of things that we need to consider about this upcoming election, which we didn't quite talk about. We talked about the redistricting debacle, but one of the things we haven't spoken about is what the impact that's going to be on the 2024 elections. We're going to be dealing not only with a pretty lackluster top of the ticket for younger voters. Younger voters are not excited about going out and voting for Joe Biden. Right. So we're going to be dealing with that. We're also going to be dealing with an incredible amount of voters fatigue, because we're going to be communicating with voters potentially about an assembly primary and then a separate Senate and congressional primary, depending on when the redistricting maps, what happens with redistricting on the 15th. And then we're going to have to contend with a general election. So there's going to be like a whole bunch of voter fatigue alongside younger voters not being super jazzed or excited about voting for Joe Biden. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And I think that a lot of the messaging that's going to have to break through is going to have to come from the bottom of the ticket, because that's what's going to drive Democratic enthusiasm in a lot of these key districts, not what's happening at the top of the ticket.
Right. And I mean, I think next year, the whole Trump circus will subsume a lot of state and local politics. I mean, you're gonna have the 4 trials, the circus of his candidacy. It's going to be a whole lot of crazy. And unfortunately, one of Biden's weaknesses is he's not able to drive a message. He's really dependent on Trump failing. He's kind of a placeholder, and if Trump, fails and alienates so many people that he loses once again, then Biden will get a second term. But I see the Democrats having a real problem driving any message, assuming they come up with a message, because of the feebleness at the top of the ticket. So yeah, you're going to need some energy from below. But I do think, NYSET can't, or those of us here can't quite solve this. But right now, Biden is not running on any positive, like he's not saying anything that he's going to do in his second term. He's saying, scary Trump. The Democrats are, trumpeting their opposition to book bans and some of the more outrageous things the Republicans are doing around the country. But there's no affirmative message. I mean, all the Build Back Better initiatives that got scuttled because of Senators Manchin and Sinema, I mean, that was an excellent agenda, and it was overwhelmingly popular with the American public. It would be great if he brought that back into his campaign. I think one other challenge Democrats face in New York, just to cut them a little bit of slack, is that because abortion rights are so strongly protected here in New York, they weren't able to sort of use the fear of what the Republicans could do to the reproductive rights of women in a way that was very effective in places like Arizona and Michigan, Wisconsin, Kansas, wherever, all these places where that reproductive rights have been winning all over the country since the Dobbs decision. So the Democrats here in New York definitely have to, come up with some messages that can work, and try to somehow rein in Eric Adams so he doesn't undermine, a lot of their candidates in the suburbs.
Okay, so next is Lorraine, and then Nancy Romer and Peter Reynes. Lorraine.
Hi,
Hi.
thank you both for really interesting presentations. John, in particular, I want to thank you. I agree with the thesis that both of you are putting forward, that we have to engage with the Democratic Party and that these third parties come out of rage and anger, which is understandable, but not productive in any way. However, I want to say that one of the issues for me is that in some ways, NYSET has had the same relationship to the PSC as the centrist wing of the Democratic Party has had to the left of the Democratic Party. And the way this has shown, and what I wonder is how this is going to impact the messages that NYSET puts out, their endorsements and their talking points. The way I've seen this most recently is around healthcare, as it's reflected in the paper. It has been absolutely no oppositional view published in the NYSET paper about the issue of privatization of healthcare. Now they're cheering because of the courts, but in general, the paper does not construct a way for other voices to come in. And I think this is not just particular, but may also impact the way they interact in 2024.
Nikki, did you want to respond?
I took a note on it, Lorraine. I have to be honest, I don't think I've read the papers cover to cover in a couple of months. So I'll take a look at it and talk to our comms team about this.
Okay, are there discussions, to your knowledge, are there discussions going on at higher levels about this problem that we've been facing in New York?
Yeah, there's certainly been many conversations about the concern of health insurance as it applies to retirees. I'm not the best person to answer those questions, but to the specific question about its inclusion in the paper, I can certainly follow up and let you know the result of that, Ann.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Nancy?
Hi, I'm just going to echo everything that Lorraine said and not repeat it because she said it so beautifully. I want to dive into the organizing aspects because this is what I see is extremely weak, both in the Democratic Party, but in NYSET. We know that there are certain, first of all, to say that the beauty of NYSET is that members appear everywhere, right? So we have massive reach in the state, and that's fabulous, right? So we want to really maximize that. If there are swing districts, I would hope that NYSET would organize so that people who are not in swing districts, like most of Brooklyn, for example, or most of Manhattan or Queens, would go to the places that you need us to go, but you have to organize that. You have to tell us the bus is leaving at this time. We're going up to that place. If we're staying overnight, this is what we're doing. If we're not, we're coming back, or people will drive. It has to be organized for us. Build it and we will come. To me, it's incredibly wasteful to have this fabulous membership. Everyone articulate. We're all good teachers. So use us. And I think that's really important. I also want to say that in general, NYSET has been very passive. So, for example, we facilitated the support of the Build Public Renewables Act bill through NYSET, and it was unanimously supported. It's a renewable energy, public ownership of renewable energy bill, but they didn't do anything. They signed on to a letter that was pre-written, didn't go to the hearings, didn't advance it. It would have not been so hard to send one person from the NYSET bureaucracy to speak in favor of it a little bit more aggressively. So then resolutions become kind of paper resolutions as opposed to organizing opportunities. I'd love to see NYSET be a fighting, organizing organization, and build it and we will come. And thank you very much for the presentations. They were great.
Thanks, Nancy. I just, to your point, I've actually spent the past 3 days with retirees from all of across our leadership structure. And they echoed a lot of what you said. Retirees have always been the backbone of NYSET's daytime army, is what we call y'all. Whenever we have competitive races across the state. A part of our challenge is that our governance structure, which is what involves our endorsement process, doesn't kick into gear until next year. So while I know where our priority races are, we don't have endorsed candidates anywhere outside of NY22 where John Mannion is running. So if there are people who are interested in getting plugged into that work early, I will throw my email address in the chat. Feel free to shoot me an email directly. I will get you plugged in as early and often as you want to get plugged into work that's happening across the state.
Where is that district, by the way?
It's in central New York. Most of the work that we're doing right now is over the phone, but we will certainly need some folks to come out for the primary. When I was in New York City last week, I met with Sam Lewis, who's an organizing staff person with the PSC, to sort of talk about some areas that we're going to have some shared priorities. So I think he and I collectively will have more of a succinct plan closer to 2024.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Peter Reynes?
Yes, this particular, I support what Lorraine's indicated and what John said, that the struggle should be within the Democratic Party. AOC and Sanders are good examples, Bowman. I'd like to know how John feels about this in particular. Until the United States has a proportional representation system, I'm very fearful that the Nader and Jill Stein factor will, as it killed Hillary. I don't think Hillary's everybody's model of a perfect president, but I think she would have been slightly better than what we got. And also, we have Cornel West this time, who is a intelligent leftist, he has a great deal of verve, and something that, of course, Biden does not have. And I'm worried if he gets 3% of the vote or even more, the Democrats on a national level will lose probably Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, all over again. Jill Stein's votes in those 3 states made the difference for Hillary in 2016. So I know this is at the national level, not at the New York State level. I think Cornel West can run in California and New York, great, show the popularity of third parties, but it's devastating if he runs in 50 states.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't think third parties are really going to have a chance of winning anything. I don't think we're going to see proportional representation anytime soon, because the 2 parties that are in control have no interest in that. I think the one pathway for third parties to potentially have some relevance and chances of winning elections is where ranked choice voting is adopted in general elections. It's in Maine. There's a version of it in Alaska. It's slowly kind of seeping into some other municipalities. That's the only way the third party thing can make sense and not play a destructive, counterproductive role. So I would certainly encourage third party advocates to really focus on that. As far as the impact of candidates like Stein and Cornel West and Ralph Nader in 2000, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it, because I think the main reasons Hillary lost in 2016 mostly had to do with her own campaign, as well as the last minute letter that was released by the FBI director. And I think another thing to keep in mind with these third party candidates like Stein is that the people who vote for them are not people who are going to automatically come out and vote for the Democrat. A lot of them are very alienated and might not vote for anyone, or even some cases might have voted for the Republican. I mean, I do think the net effect of a Stein or Cornel West candidate is to siphon off some votes from the Democrats, but I don't think we can assume that those people are all going to march the polls and vote for the Democratic Party candidate if they didn't have a third party choice. And ultimately, it would also behoove the Democrats, again, like I was saying, to offer more compelling rationales to support them besides the scary Trump rationales, like bringing back Build Back Better, for example, or robust action on climate. But I at the end of the day, I share your worry, and I wish Cornel West. I certainly hope he doesn't play too damaging a role next year.
Nikki, did you have any thoughts? No.
Nope, John covered it.
Okay, I saw Cecilia before. She had her hand raised. Is Cecilia here?
I'm here, but I was going to ask the question about the third party, and Peter got there before me. So I just want to tell our NYSET person that I was part of the retiree council meetings last week, where they did have a lot of issues related to health care and insurance that were on the table. And I think because of what has happened down here in New York City in relation to our health insurance, I think that was a wake-up call to many of the retiree councils, retiree locals across the state, as to what's coming down the pike for them. So there's a great deal of concern about it now.
Thank you. Any other questions? So, Nikki, you kind of got cut a little short. I don't know if you want to make any closing remarks, or John, any closing. Oh, here's another John. John Highland, you have a question?
Yes, question, excuse me, largely for Nikki. I don't understand why NYSET, once upon a time, X number of years ago, came out in favor of Medicare for all, and now is largely either on the sidelines or in quiet or in favor of the kinds of deals that are being proposed in New York City. Why has NYSET not stayed consistent with its position on healthcare and realize that the privatization of healthcare is, I would say, crazy and contradictory to the interest of the labor movement across the board?
I'm happy to respond to the best that I can. I mean, I'm not a subject matter expert in healthcare. It's not my department. I focus predominantly on electing people to office that share NYSET's values. I know that there's been a lot of conversation about this across the organization, specifically with what's happening with NYSHIP. I know that there is a group of staff that is working on it. I'm not part of that team. So I just don't have much that I can say other than to take your name down, John, and I can try to get you a better answer to that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, I do see a few more hands. Lenore Beaky, and then Jane Mushabak.
Hi, thanks. Since this issue of healthcare has come up, I want to address this to not the presenters themselves, but to us, the retiree chapter, and our entire PSC. What I do not see is a really active, engaged advocacy on the healthcare issue. We get lots of emails about your rallies, you rally here, you rally there, things that are highlighted and bold-faced with exclamation points and all of that. There's an excitement there. But our issue about healthcare, which, as you concede, is coming for the actives, they're next, seems to me to be absent. And I would like to see more of that. James Davis referred at the last meeting to their little working group. That's a quote. You can go to the recording. He called it a little working group. in the delegate assembly. I'm glad to know that there is a working group. I would suggest for the agenda next month, the month after, that a presentation to us be made about what is happening with that working group and what we can contribute to their work as well. And that's what I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Lenore. That is very useful. I could say something about that, but I'm not going to do that right now. Jane, and then Walter Down.
Hi, thank you so much for this excellent presentation, both of you. John and Nikki, very, very helpful about some things that's of great concern to us. In support of what John was talking about, that kind of lockstep supporting old-time Democrats, I want to report how horribly shocked I was. Tell me somebody what year it was when the IDC finally was being pushed out of office. I was working on Robert Jackson's campaign, and I went to the union website and saw that the person PSC had endorsed for my district was actually the IDC woman with a Hispanic name. And actually, I was so shocked. I couldn't believe it. Here we were fighting the IDC, that is the fake Democrats in the state legislature. And so that's what connected in my mind to that, perhaps a pattern of supporting people who had been, you know, sort of longtime allies in theory, if not in action. So just wanted to report that story. I thought, how can my great union be doing that? They don't know that what the IDC is. And anyway, so one other thought was Lenore's comment is very important. Thank you. That when we won the second lawsuit against Adams and the city, retaining Medicare, traditional Medicare, and the supplementary, my son, who's a very active UFT member and complainer about the UFT and their sabotage, he said, yeah, Mom, it's great for you, but now they're going to come after us, namely the active employees. So I just want to thank you, Lenore, for bringing up that important point that we're all connected here, and the fight is overwhelming. How do you stop the tsunami? But as John and Nikki have said, we're going to do that as best as we can. And thank you for supporting and explaining and analyzing some of the things that happen and that we want to happen, obviously.
Can I respond real quickly to Jane?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
In the same spirit of kind of getting out of some of those ruts of supporting the people who are just already there. Part of what I was saying earlier was a lead up to really encourage the idea that Eric Adams can be challenged and defeated in 2025. I think he's deeply hostile to the idea of a public sector unless it involves law enforcement. The rest he would throw overboard. And whatever favors he may dole out before the election, if he's reelected, I think he would take away and continue to attack the public sector and the working class of New York. And in the same spirit in 2026, if progressives can mount a strong challenge to Kathy Hochul, especially if someone like Jamal Bowman or even AOC would come back to New York and run for that higher office, I think that would be a moment for an incredible breakthrough. I don't know if that is going to happen, but if that did start to unfold, I really hope progressive labor unions would embrace that moment and not run away from it.
Thank you. Okay, I think.
I just want to say something very quickly, just for those who don't know. There's been a couple of comments about candidates that NYSET has endorsed or that the PSC has endorsed. just want to make sure everyone knows that these are not decisions that staff or elected officers make. This is a democratic process where members come together from all across the state to debate and look at candidates and make determinations about who's the most viable, who best aligns our values. So that's where those endorsements come from. It's all through a democratic process, so that is then affirmed by the board of directors, which several of the PSC officers sit on. Doesn't always go our way we individually want, but it is a very robust, engaging, and democratic process.
Okay, Walter, I think you'll be the last questioner on this part of the meeting, and then we'll go to the healthcare.
Thanks. Since healthcare has come up in connection with the politics, and so I'd like to just continue with that.
Yeah.
John Hyland noted that NYSERD has been absent on the retiree healthcare issue, and I think one obvious guess as to why is that the UFT is on the wrong side of this question and in support of Mayor Adams. So that's, that puts NYSERD certainly in a bind as far as supporting the retirees on this issue. But also I'd like to mention, look at our own Clarion newspaper this month. It was an article about the retirees' victories in courts. It condemns Adams, but does not even mention that the leaders of the dominant unions of the city are on Adams's side against us. So, we are pulling our punches in discussing this question in our very own union, which is on the right side of this question. And I should also mention this article, it mentions the court victories, as have one or two people here. The article doesn't mention the New York City Retirers Organization that launched and won those court cases. It suggests that it implies, I'm not quite saying so, that the unions did it, and it's not the case. Most of the unions were on the wrong side.
Yeah, I just read that article this morning because I was away and I hadn't gotten my Clarions. I read that article and I'm quoted in that article, and I noticed that exactly what you said. I didn't mention the New York City public retiree, I can't remember the full name, but I did say working with other organizations, and I think that perhaps somebody should write a letter to the editor on that. I mentioned the organization as the leaders of the lawsuit in my opening speech last month, but that is an issue in the PSC. So, thank you for raising it again. So anyway, I want to thank our two speakers, John and Nikki. I think they were very informative, very perceptive analyses, a lot of food for thought. John, I will try to make it my business to read the Independent more often, and we'll keep track of the NYSERD record on healthcare and look at the newspaper. And I thank you, Nikki, for saying that you would try to get some answers for a couple of our questioners. And I think we're going to move on to the next part of the meeting. So I thank you also, Liz Stevenson. I don't know if she's here, but thank you very much. So
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
yes.
Thank you.
So you're very, very welcome. Is Debbie Bell here? She did enter the.
Yes, I'm here.
Debbie. Okay, so Debbie is here. Dina's not here today. There's not all that much to say, but Debbie will give us a little update on the Medicare Advantage front. So thank you, Debbie. And congratulations on your new granddaughter. Debbie
Thank
had
you.
a granddaughter.
Yes, we had a new granddaughter 2 weeks ago.
Good.
So as Anne said, there is not a lot to report. The win that's been described so far in the meeting is being appealed by the city to the appellate division. And this is based on a report from a staffer at the city's Office of Labor Relations. They're scheduled to submit their papers or their revised papers today in the court. Just to give you a feel, I'm not a lawyer, but several lawyers have described sort of how this process works. The city files its papers in the appeal, then the plaintiffs, who are the New York City Retiree Organization, file their papers in response. Then oral arguments are scheduled by the court and then held. And then the appellate division issues a decision, and looking at the history of that can take anywhere from a month to 6 months. The implication of that is that it's hard to predict when it will be clear where we're going on retiree health care, but I feel confident that nothing is going to change through the end of 2023. And I also feel confident that if in the end something is going to change, there will have to be a fair amount of lead time in order to make that change. Should either party lose, quote unquote, at the appellate division level, there is a next level in the state court system, which is the State Court of Appeals. Whoever loses has to apply to appeal and be accepted. But I have no doubt that the way things are going, whoever loses will in fact appeal, so that will again sort of prolong this process. So that's really all we know at this point. I think we look for opportunities, and I know the chapter informs members of opportunities to continue to make the voices of retirees heard in opposition. I know that some retirees across the city have been active in building alliances with retirees in other cities and states where Medicare Advantage has either been imposed or is being talked about by municipalities as an option. I know that representatives of the chapter have begun to meet with Congress people. There is a lot that could be done at the federal level to rein in the insurance companies that offer Medicare Advantage plans, both in terms of the regulations and in terms of how the funding works. So one project can continue to be meeting with and educating Congress people. I mean, what's clear, and Bonnie Nelson and a group met with her congressperson, what's clear is neither the Congress people nor their staffs understand this very well. No surprise, it took all of us months to wrap our heads around it. So I think we will be doing ourselves a good service to continue with that lobbying / educational process while the court process proceeds. The one thing I did want to announce to the chapter is that the IRMA reimbursements will be paid out by the city this month. IRMA, and I asked Bonnie Nelson will post in the chat a link to the city website that sort of describes IRMA. If your income is above a certain level, you pay more than the straight Medicare Part B reimbursement. More than that is taken out of your Social Security check. And it's in the letter you get every year telling you what your Social Security benefit will be for the coming year, what your Medicare Part B reimbursement will be for the coming, and Medicare Part B obligation payment will be. That reduces the benefit. And for those with incomes high enough, what the IRMA charge will be. There is also an IRMA prescription drug charge. That is not reimbursed by the city, but the IRMA medical charge is, and those payments will be made towards the end of October. And for PSC retirees, those happen in two different ways. If you are a TRS retiree and you get your pension benefits direct deposited to your checking account or bank account, the IRMA reimbursement will be direct deposited as well. So it'll just show up in your checking account. If you are a TIA retiree, the city, the Office of Labor Relations, mails out IRMA reimbursement checks, and they will do that at the end of October. Please wait until towards the end of November if you do not get a check and you think you are owed one. In order to get your IRMA reimbursement every year, you must apply every year. Medicare Part B, once you do your initial application to the Office of Labor Relations to have that reimbursed, it's automatically reimbursed every year in April. The IRMA amounts you pay each year changes each year because your income from the prior year changes each year. This is why if you go on the website, it'll explain it a little better. If you are making IRMA payments and you have never applied for a reimbursement because you didn't know you could, you do have a 3-year look back window to apply. It requires putting together some paperwork, documenting, your income tax return, et cetera, but that's all explained relatively clearly on the website. But I did want those who are expecting a reimbursement to know that they should be coming towards the end of October. And if you're getting a check in the mail, as we know, the mail can take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So wait until November. And if no check comes, then contact the Office of Labor Relations. Again, copy down this website. It'll indicate where you can contact at the Office of Labor Relations, but they're not going to be responsive until sort of past the middle of November. I'm happy to take any questions on any of this.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie. I see 2 hands. I see Mike Frank and I see Eileen. Mike? Oh, wait a minute. Am I on mute?
No, you're good.
Okay.
Debbie, you reported, I think at the last meeting or previous meeting, that there's an RFP for in-service people. RFP meaning request for proposals. And my understanding is that the MLC, the Municipal Labor Committee, and the city work together on the RFP. That's kind of a collaborative project. You've seen it. You're on the technical committee. 2 questions. Can you give us some details of the content of that? And 2, can you send a copy of that to the retirees exec?
I have seen it. It took some doing to get it. It is what they did was they did a request for information, and then they did a negotiated acquisition request. It is what it does is it invites essentially what are health plans to apply to provide insurance coverage to municipal government employees. It sets forth some provisions. I have been remiss in my initial cut at trying to find it again. I couldn't find it, but I'm sure it's somewhere in my laptop. So I just have to find the keyword to get it. And thank you for reminding me, Mike, because Anne did ask for that, or Bonnie did, one of the 2. The way they set it up is they define the group that's to be covered. They define what they want covered. They do not want to charge employees a premium or a co-premium, and the city wants to save $1 billion a year. A lot of the material in the request for information has to do with the rules regarding the city's desire to have organizations run by people of color and by women applying in, there's a sort of general rule they have with contracts to encourage those other companies other than those run by white males to apply for things. They have a number of other documents and on this stuff. So I'll do my best to get it and get it to the chapter. The status report on that is that they are down to 2 health plans as finalists, and because PSC is, I think, been somewhat oppositional with regard to the Medicare Advantage contract, we are not on the inside in terms of how things are progressing. Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. But, you know, and as soon as we know much more, I report it, but I don't know much more. They claim that they are sort of at a pretty close to a decision about which plan to recommend. So sometime in the next month, 2 months, 3 months, I expect we will get a lot more details about this plan. You know, now I'm going to offer my own subjective opinion here. I think that the municipal unions have historically been very reluctant to have their members be charged co-premiums. Understandably, because as we've seen for state employees, it is a slippery slope. In other words, once people start paying a little bit, then the next contract they have to pay more and more and more and more. However, the result of that has been in recent years, as hospital prices in particular have accelerated as fast as they have, that co-payments go up a lot. So that, you know, people, this has the effect of penalizing those who need to see doctors or need hospital services more than others, which is sort of contrary to the idea of insurance. I mean, the idea of insurance is you spread the risk and everybody pays something and everybody's taken care of. So co-payments have gone up for the actives, and I would expect they will go up more under the new plan, or we'll see a gradual escalation. In addition, I'm concerned that something that was talked about going back to Bob Lynn when he was labor commissioner is tiering hospitals around the city so that people who want to go to the higher profile, more expensive hospitals will have to pay larger co-payments for the services there. Again, you're penalizing people who need those services as opposed to everybody else, which is a lousy approach to insurance. Now, I don't know that that's what is in these plans. I'm just saying what I'm worried about. So I will send you this RFA. I'm not sure it's going to be that illuminating, to tell you the truth, because I don't know where they've ended up in terms of, we haven't gotten anything more in writing in terms of where the actual proposals are. But I'll get it to Anne as soon as I can.
Right. Yeah, I also asked James. I don't know if James asked you, but okay, so there's a few questions. I think we'll take these 4 questions. Eileen, Myra, Barbara Backer, and then John Highland. Eileen.
Yeah, I wanted to know, I don't know if this question actually is for Debbie or for somebody else on the Health Strategy Committee, but the PSC had been planning, at least from when James was reporting at the Social Safety Net Committee, that they were trying to do an amicus brief also in this process that Debbie outlined, where like the city responds to that it lost the case and now it's on the appeal. And then the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees gets to respond to that. And it sounded like there was really a question, like you almost had to be invited to offer an amicus brief. And I just like, if there's more information about that and how that's progressing from the PSC side, if where actually in a position to go forward with the amicus brief and it would actually be accepted? Thanks.
I don't have a firm answer to that question, but the process is that the court has to accept you to file an amicus brief. But prior, I know that the union leadership is consulting with their attorneys about the advisability of doing so and what to argue. And I know that they are discussing with the attorneys representing the plaintiffs whether an amicus brief plays a positive role. In other words, an amicus brief that merely restates what the plaintiffs are arguing, I'm not a lawyer, but may not be all that constructive. So I think the reason we haven't gotten an update is there's still a fair number of questions.
Right. And there has to be new arguments in there. They can't just repeat the same argument.
Right.
Ira? Unmute, please.
Am I unmute? Okay.
Yes.
Two very quick questions. Is it, from what you've said, it seems as if I have some surgery scheduled for January that's important because the waiting list is so long and it has to be done. Will I not have to worry because with all of the things that are still happening, January, February, which is only 4 months away or so, we will be still covered while everything else is going on around our healthcare? Is that safe to assume? It sounds like it should be.
I think it's safe to assume.
It's safe.
Here's my logic, Myra.
Louise?
I don't want. I would assume you're going to be okay because, given what I described about the court process, it's hard for me to believe there'll be a decision before the end of the year.
Luis?
Emblem has already said they cannot unwind senior care in less than 45 days.
Okay. Well, I understood what you said before.
Yeah.
The other
point, you have another question?
Irma, it's even shorter. Irma, is there any way, I used to go to 40 Rector Street when I had questions. Is there any way, either via phone or if I show up in their building where they're on the 12th floor, that I can talk to anyone? I want to make sure that my Irma papers for this year are in, and I think I did it, but I don't know. So,
okay. So don't go. Go to the website. There should be a phone number. If you get stuck and just don't get a response, let the chapter know, and I'll work with the chapter to follow up.
Okay, thanks a lot.
People, particularly the TIAA folks, do sometimes have problems getting their checks. So if you wait till the last half of November, contact OLR. Last year they were much better. They were much more responsive to people who had not received their checks. Contact OLR. If by the beginning of December, there's still silence, let the retirees chapter know, and we'll work on getting some answers for people.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara Backer and then John Highland. Unmute, Barbara. Can we unmute Barbara?
I asked her to, there you go.
Ava.
Yeah, Barbara, you were unmuted for a second. Can you hit that again? Yes, now you're unmuted.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I understand that the city council can do something in terms of changing the administrative code to allow this, to allow our group to proceed. Has anything happened? Is there any lobbying of city council people to change the code? I know the speaker is not enthusiastic about this, but I thought there might be someone or some other committee working on city council lobbying to change this in terms of the code.
The speaker has the ability to send bills to different committees. Nothing seems to be moving, and the general wisdom seems to be that nothing's going to happen before the end of the year. I think, again, this is a personal observation. A lot of unions are threatening city council people, we won't support you if you support this bill. While it has, I think, 17 co-sponsors, that number has not grown, and nor has the pressure to move the bill to a committee for a hearing, nor does it appear to have grown. I'm not sitting in City Hall, so maybe I'm missing something. That's sort of a status report on that. I think it's a little bit of a wait and see. I would, again, this is a personal observation. I'm not sure that what is proposed in that bill accomplishes what we would like to see accomplished. And that's part of the problem, is, that the language of the bill doesn't really change anything. So maybe what's going on is people are waiting to see what happens in the courts. We'll see.
Is there anything from our group, any lobbying group or anybody?
No, I think James addressed that. If you're talking about the 1099 bill, is that what you're referring to? I think James addressed that last week. We have a number of concerns. So from the PSC end, no. Okay, John, and then Myra, is that a new hand? Okay, because we have to move this. John Highland. John has to unmute.
Very good. Okay. Excuse me. Hi, Debbie. I have one question and one comment. The question is, and I hope it's not too naive, but what would it take to stop the MLC from negotiating for all of us without our participation? And the point is, could you automatically send us any information that you get from the MLC about these negotiations regarding the actives, just automatically? I think it's clear from our practice that we want as much information as we can get on what's going on. Thank you.
I'll answer the second one first. My response, my obligation is to the president of the union. So that's who I report to. So I think your request appropriately goes to him.
Okay, gotcha.
I think the realistic answer is, could we stop the MLC from negotiating our healthcare? The realistic answer is no. There's the basic obligation is in the administrative code. So really what the unions in coalition have done is to negotiate tweaks. Some of them are pretty big tweaks. I understand that. But realistically, I think the answer is no. I think the MLC has felt the pressure of the retirees. There are complicated responses that individual unions have offered in terms of their obligations to their own retiree groups. And what you will see looking around is that PSC retirees do better benefit-wise than many other retiree groups. So it's what it really is it's a political process of which our PSC retiree members have been engaged in. And, I'll go back to the point that was made earlier about the continuing need for activism, that, the voices have been heard. They haven't been responded to exactly as we would like. But I think at this point, retirees have been acknowledged to have a voice. And going forward, the question is going to be, is that voice going to be this sort of independent New York City municipal retiree organization voice, or is it going to be a voice inside their individual unions and thereby with the MLC? I mean, I think you got to take the long view a little bit, which is hard to say to which is hard for me as a 70-plus-year-old to say to you all, to 65-plus-year-olds. But
80-plus-year-olds,
80, yeah, whatever.
Well, thank you. Anyway, John, great question. Myra, I'm going to ask you to put your question in the chat, please, because we have to move on. What? I'm going to ask you to put your question in the chat, if you don't mind.
It's very important.
It's very important. All right, 30 seconds.
I was in a 2-hour Zoom on Saturday. Charles Barron explained in great depth 1099, and the guest speaker was Evie Jones Rich. And there is an article which I did put in the chat, which was written up after that meeting in Work Bites. So the reference to that is in the chat, along with it was written up that evening.
Thank you. I've seen it. Some of us have seen it, but thank you very much. Okay, we have 2 important announcements. First one is coming from Nancy. Excuse me, somebody in this house is making noise, and somebody's going to be in trouble.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So
Nancy, go ahead, and I'm gonna.
Okay, I'm gonna be as quick as I can. Just to say, look, we're all here because we're very connected to CUNY. We're very connected to the PSC. We know the magic that can happen with CUNY and all of our students. It's important that it's funded, that we have good, solid contract demands. Management is being outrageous, as they almost always are. And we, as retirees, are really needed to participate in the contract campaign that is hot and heavy right now. Here are some things that we can do. I'll backtrack a little bit. We're in the middle of a national union upsurge. This is really exciting. We need to be part of that. And, we're all here on this Zoom because we care about the union and we care about ourselves. Let's be really supportive and participate as much as we can in the contract struggle. So first and foremost, the campaign is going to have a focus each week on a different borough. So right now, Brooklyn is having an October 30th through November 2nd activity. The big culminating event will be Wednesday, November 1st, 4:30 to 6:30 at Brooklyn Borough Hall. The Bronx goes next. And there will be marches on 3 campuses against the 3 presidents to put pressure on them to have us win the contract demands that we need. Those events will be on Thursday, November 9th, and Queens and Manhattan will be coming thereafter. Please, we're going to be, I guess, Ava's putting a link in the chat.
Can I just correct the order of things is first Staten Island is having an action. Sorry, let me just go back. Almost exact, just a little bit out of order. First, there is an action happening on Staten Island. Staff at the college are going to be wearing red, staff and faculty on Tuesday, October 10th. That's next week. Then Manhattan chapters are going to be turning out to the Manhattan Board of Trustees meeting that's happening in Manhattan on the 16th at 4:30 p.m. And followed by Queens having a borough-wide speak out at York College the October 24th, 12 to 2. Then the event that Nancy mentioned, focused on Halloween and Day of the Dead, and finally the Bronx, November 6th through 10th.
Okay, thank you. We will put these in our blast to remind people, and I'm sure they're on the website. Nancy, you were interrupted. Do you want to?
No, that's okay. No, Ava did a great job. The main point is for us to be able to jump in and support. And when you get that link that describes these various actions, either go to one of the actions that are happening at the campus that you retired from, or a campus that's near your home. but having retirees there is really important. And the last thing I want to say is about, you can see it on the screen now, bargaining. The strategy right now is to have as many people at the bargaining sessions as possible. We're there in support. We're not speaking unless we're or orchestrated to do so beforehand. But it's really important for management to see that we're serious and that we have a lot of support behind our negotiators. So you need to go to an online orientation. It's a quick hour to sort of learn the rules of how to be a good supporter of the contract negotiations. It's very important to go because you see for yourself how management is treating us, what they're demanding, some of their outrageous statements, and you can see how strong our side of the table is. So please try to participate and know that we still have a role in the union and we still have a role at CUNY. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And we have to have a role. And I know that there were over 75 people at the mass meeting on Thursday, over 75 retirees, and we will be there. And I can't emphasize enough what Nancy said, to go to a bargaining session, to watch our team led by James, and to watch and listen to what we're up against with management is quite an education and a very interesting show. So next is our welfare fund. Michael Foley's going to say something about the vaccines. People have been asking who pays for what, and any other questions welfare fund related he'll take. So Michael, thank you for coming.
No, it's my pleasure, Ann. Thank you so much. As everyone knows, cold and flu season is here. It's a time to protect yourself. You may have heard the recent news about the new COVID boosters that are out, as well as the recommendation from the CDC that people age 60 and up get the RSV vaccine. As retirees, you're in better shape than others on getting these vaccines. Just as a quick rundown, for your COVID, flu, and pneumonia vaccines, it's utilizing your Medicare card, either at a pharmacy or through your physician. For the RSV vaccine, as well as things like shingles, Tdap, and any other maintenance type vaccines, it's your SilverScript card. The RSV is kind of the unusual one because it's sort of new to the game as far as for those of you who are over age 60. But it is utilizing your SilverScript card is the best bet to receive the vaccine at little to no cost. If you go to the Welfare Fund's website, psccunywf.org, I'll put it in the chat. You'll see a couple stories about vaccines along with a very helpful grid that explains what I just mentioned as far as which card to use for which particular vaccine you're interested in. Let me put that in the chat right now. One second. Any questions regarding vaccines? So there's the website in the chat. If you have any questions at all, you can email me at communications@psccunywf.org or go directly to the website, and we've put up a good primer for folks that may have any questions about particularly COVID, flu, and RSV. So yeah, do what you can to get that shot, get those shots, and so that way you'll have a healthy fall and winter.
Hopefully. Okay, are there any other announcements, important things that our colleagues should hear? Going once, going twice. We're actually ending early at 10:03. I'm sure you will find something to do in those 10 minutes and spend your time productively. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, let me tell you about November. Sorry. November 6th meeting. The title is Environmental Justice, Climate Crises, and Actions. We have a couple of very hot speakers. Rebecca Bratz P.S., I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, of the CUNY Law School, and Cecilia McCall, who's going to talk about the organization Third Act. So keep a lookout for those announcements in the blast. And again, we will use our judgments as to what we need in terms of the healthcare updates as a second part of the meeting. So write to us at retirees@pscmail.org. Make sure your membership is in. If you have problems, let me know or contact the membership department. And have a great day and a great rest of the month. Thank you very much.